and without wanting to be the rain on your parade there, Sean. Well, perhaps wanting to be that is that.
Yes, please do it.
Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanty Show.
This service is not available in your region.
That's correct. If you are in your region, you can't listen to this podcast. It's not available to you. You're listening now, It's on a pirated stream.
I'm
Cheaters. So sorry. I'm Sean.
I'm Brandon.
I'm David.
And on today's show, we're going to discuss the wild world of international streaming and why it annoys the living crap out of the international crew of this podcast.
But before we do that, a friendly reminder that we want to hear from you. So please share your comments with us about this and past episodes at skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions. We want to put together a listener mailbag episode with your thoughts, questions, topic suggestions, and more. So please get those thoughts in.
Please do. We're waiting on lots and lots of comments. We got no comments. We got lots of, read my books, which we will do sometimes, but that's not what we're looking for. We want your comments. So tell us you disagree with us or something.
Yes, please.
I mean, we live in a super divisive society. At least be divisive.
Oh, God. Maybe not too divisive, but still.
Nice divisive. I disagree with your interpretation of that movie. That movie is an A+ movie, not a D-. Go for it. Bring it.
Stick to simple rather than complex division.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, exactly as David says. All right, so let's get to this topic. So the reason this topic came up is I believe that on at least 750 different times, David and I have tried to cover a movie that was not available in Canada for various things, from torture cinema to Totally Pretentious to other things. And it has been a frustration because we would, of course, prefer to support the people who created the object by even paying to rent it, but that has sometimes not been an option. And then when Brandon came on as a magic person on this show, being my co-host, this happened yet again and again and again and again. That stuff was just not available in his particular region. David up in Canada, Brandon down in Trinidad. And so this has created complications. And so I want to start with why is it like this?
Well, I mean, I feel like you're asking the wrong people. We should be asking you, why is it like this?
I didn't do this. If it was my choice, literally everything would be available on a streaming service everywhere.
Yeah, no, because the complicated answer that I keep seeing whenever people ask these questions is that there are complicated legal reasons that those individual streaming services cannot go into, and that's why they have to specifically set aside time and effort and work to introduce streaming services into various regions. But let people know what those things are, so maybe we can collectively resolve those problems, because everybody wants to watch the same thing. It's not my fault as a Trinidadian person that I live in the shadow of colonialism and empire, such that I know for a fact that there is a quote-unquote superior group of media entities out there in the world that are so divorced from me that I have to wait for them to become available for me to consume while everybody's talking about them at the exact same time. I just want to watch the thing.
And I think we run into two different sort of kinds of obstacles there too. One is the rights issues involving the specific thing itself. And I say this without any great expertise, but the rights involving a given film will vary from region to region depending on when and how it was released, right? So that's one of the things we run into. But then the other is just the fact of the streaming service itself. So I assume we all have access to Netflix in one form or another. But the stuff that is on Netflix in the United States is not the same stuff that's, there's a lot of the same stuff, but it's not the same catalog that's available in Canada. But then there's the other thing involving actual streaming services. So Hulu, for instance, is just not an option up here. It's just not available, period.
Yeah, I was thinking in particular, David, you're raising the issue of like the specific media property, the rights for that might be held in such a way that it can't be placed on a streaming service. And the example that comes to mind immediately, which I'm sure you and I, David, in particular, have been annoyed by, is the fact that Dawn of the Dead, the original 1978 film, is not available on any legal method of streaming. And in a lot of cases is largely unavailable even in physical media. I mean, there are versions of it floating around,
Right.
but you're going to have to get them probably at well past the price of what it originally would have sold for. And that's largely because the owner of the IP for that has refused to ever allow it without basically extortionist demands. I mean, he even at one point said that he would burn all of the negatives so nobody could make it, solely so he could get lots of money for the release through the Criterion collection, which obviously Criterion was like, we're not going to pay you an absurd amount. So that movie is completely not available because of the weird esoteric nature of how rights are held, even within a film franchise.
Okay, I didn't realize that was happening with Dawn of the Dead. I was familiar with it with some of American International Pictures. So things like I Was a Teenage Werewolf and Teenage Frankenstein and others of that ilk are being held by the widow of Samuel Z. Arkoff, I believe, and she's refusing to release them. So other than the VHS versions that came out decades ago, they remain completely unavailable. And similarly with, I think, pretty much the entire corpus of Russ Meyer's films. So that's yet another separate thing, which of course is that's separate from streaming itself,
right?
And then there's also the streaming versus physical media issue, about which I have some very firmly held thoughts, but that may be slightly adjacent to the issue at hand.
Yeah, but I think what all this is getting to is the fact that because of the way the rights are divvied up for various media products, there could be, dozens of different reasons for why something's not on a streaming service, and even more reasons for why it's on some but not on others. So like Netflix, which I think, David, you raised earlier, right, where it'll be completely different catalogs in different countries. So I run into this when I went to Vietnam, that there were lots of things on Vietnam's Netflix that were not on the US Netflix. And while that's really cool for me when I was there, because you just fill up your tablet, then turn on your airplane mode and then don't take it off, and then you can watch anything that you've downloaded until you're done with it. And then when you turn it on, it clears out and puts up the US catalog. That's not terribly useful if what you're wanting to watch is, say, something like, in Brandon's case, Leverage, which I just found out is, at least in the United States, available on Amazon Prime with ads. But I don't know if it's available for you in any capacity other than Apple TV, maybe, if Apple TV is down there, because this would raise the other question came from David, which is that some streaming services that I can take advantage of, folks like you two might not even be able to get at all, depending on where you are. And so, Brandon, you want to kind of jump in there?
Oh, I definitely wanted to jump in. Because this is where I get to talk about the other thing that I talk about just as often, if not more often, than all of my frustration with international streaming services, which is Kamen Rider. As I would have mentioned in an episode of Righteous Kicks that will be available soon, there is a streaming service that is available in the US called Tokushoutsu. It's really rad if you want to watch Ultraman, if you want to watch like classic Godzilla, if you want to watch talk shows about tokusatsu, you can watch it on the streaming service, and it's free. It's also the only streaming service that has... It was, up until a point rather, the only streaming service that had the rights to any Kamen Rider series in the United States. It started with the original 1971 Kamen Rider series. It has since gotten the rights to a handful of others. It has since introduced other series to also get the rights to some of those other streaming services to get the rights to some other Kamen Rider series. And that's really cool because it's given people the opportunity to watch those things for cheap or for free online whenever they want. It's not available in Trinidad and Tobago. It's not available in other countries where, even if not Kamen Rider, other tokusatsu series that are on Tokushoutsu have been previously available on their television. in the like early ages of tokusatsu on television. When it initially advertised itself, and frequently whenever they get a new property, will go out of its way to say that this is the first time that an individual Kamen Rider series has been available in North America, but it's not available in Canada.
Which part of that's not North America? North America is not United States.
Yeah, I
There's other
didn't know
stuff
North
here.
America was just the America that is in the north. It's like, wow,
Well,
cool,
that's like so
thanks.
confusing. So they had to actually like the United States like hugs Canada a little bit because Alaska's up there. So like the way that that's set up means that like a whole portion of North America that's between parts of the United States had to be excluded. So
Yeah.
it's so absurd.
I assume it's therefore also not available in Mexico.
Yeah, it's not.
That's so dumb.
It's really frustrating, and becomes obviously even more frustrating when Toei Company, the company that produces Kamen Rider, then made their own YouTube channel and said, "Hey, if you want to watch Kamen Rider here, you can watch Kamen Rider here too." But they only add subtitles for 2 episodes at a time. So if you wanted to watch any of the classic Toei live action shows that they've ever produced, you better know Japanese, which is very frustrating because a lot of fans have gone out of their way to say, we would like to pay for this thing. And as I will mention in greater detail in that Righteous Kicks episode, it has become like a genuine source of frustration among fans who have gone out of their way to like essentially say, if it weren't for us fan subbing, that is, if it weren't for us essentially committing a crime in the early 90s, no tokusatsu would ever be as popular in the West in the first place, except for Power Rangers. That's like totally discounting the actual like Japanese history of Power Rangers. People would be watching that and not Super Sentai. But they want, like, that generation of fans now has disposable income and would like to spend it, even if it meant we need to actually pay for a streaming service just so we can watch the thing. And we cannot.
Yeah, this is the thing that which frustrating, being on the other end of, for the most part I have access to quite a lot. I mean, there's still stuff that I can't get that are some esoteric rights related problem. But like when something is available to me in the United States and I want to do a show with David or you, Brandon, or both of you, and that thing is not even for purchase as a digital rental, right, on something, it creates a situation in which either we don't cover the thing at all because perhaps one of us, and I won't necessarily out anybody, but one of us might feel particularly morally disinclined or ethically disinclined to pirate, right? Either that becomes a solution or we pirate, which defeats the purpose of the money we were literally going to throw down in order to watch the thing. David, that had happened with you with a, was it like the second Children of the Corn?
I still bear
I
the
think?
scars from that. Yeah.
There's a second Children of the Corn?
There are many
Oh,
Children
there are
of the
many
Corn.
of them. Yes.
Yeah. And to be fair, that might not have been worth paying for, but David would have paid for it.
Yeah.
I would have happily paid full price on iTunes if I could have just to get any version of it. But it was simply utterly unobtainable.
Yeah. And so there's money being lost there. It's probably not a lot in the case of Children of the Corn 2. Let's be honest, it's not a blockbuster film. But in the case of Kamen Rider, right, that has I would argue a much more sizable fan base than Children of the Corn 2 does. And so there is if the fandom is saying we have money, please take our money so that we can have access to the thing, and they're being like, no.
Yeah.
One then wonders what are the motivations going on there, because clearly it's not strictly profit. There's something else motivating decisions there.
Because I've thought about this a lot. Because, like, I feel like it's obviously a kind of business mathematics when you observe that there are hundreds of people living in countries that cannot watch your show, who have bought toys for your show, and will proudly cosplay characters from your show that they have not seen because they cannot see it, and will continue to proselytize your show even though they cannot see it. And then you give them the opportunity to see it. It's like, yes, please take my money. And then you turn around and go, no, I don't want your money. I'd rather you went back to not being able to see the thing. And the thing is, what's even more hilarious is that Bandai, the company that has the toy rights for Kamen Rider and a lot of other tokusatsu stuff and a lot of anime stuff in general, did what I presume is an experiment early this year, which is they came out with a new IP television series called Girl Gun Lady, which is like a plastic model teenage drama about a teenage girl waking up in a death game. It's a lot, and one of these days I want to talk about it all by itself. But this is a new IP. No one knew anything about it. The only real attachment to anything else that Bandai has ever made is that the plastic models that are in the show you can buy from Bandai. And they decided to just put every episode of season 1 on YouTube for free, subs and everything, and it actually blew up. People really enjoyed it. It's not the most popular thing in the world, but people not only enjoyed it, but people wanted to buy the plastic models. That's a good enough indication that there is a market, at least for introducing tokusatsu to a Western audience, that they've just been leaving money on the table for with one of their most established brands ever, even though there is a service that is already available, but only to one country. They could be making 4 times as much money as they want, but they're not gonna do that. So I don't know, like, what do we do at that point? Other than pirate, which I already have all kinds of very complicated feelings about.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I also have fairly complicated feelings, even though I'm in a medium environment where I have access to a considerable amount of material. And it mostly comes down to sometimes the way that the rights are divvied up means that, like, I just can't get access to the thing. So one of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies is, like, not streaming anywhere. And I wanted to watch them chronologically. So, like, how do I watch them chronologically? Because, like, HBO Max had all of them except, like, I think number 3 at one point. And I couldn't get it on any of the other 4,000 streaming services I have. And some sort of rights thing held that back. And so what recourse do I have? I can buy it on Blu-ray, if it's available. I think it is. Or I can pirate it. When you take out even the physical media doesn't exist anymore, you've left people who want to watch your thing literally only one option. They're going to pirate it. I don't know. I have complicated feelings. I suspect we all do. But at that point, is it really unethical to say, I want to be able to have access to this thing, but because of the country I live in, you've not made it accessible to me, so I'm going to take the only recourse I have to enjoy the thing? That's unethical? At that point, I don't know. Maybe it's a little unethical for the company, which in your case, Brandon, owns the entire IP to make it available in every country. At least in the case of stuff that I'm talking about, like, there might be weird esoteric rights things because of who owns international distribution rights. In that case, they own all the rights, so they could put it out there.
Yeah, but, like, another thing that, like, is as a kind of aside to this conversation, but is still obviously kind of prescient to me, is the fact that now that digital streaming is available, it obviously brings in the question of what content is being saved in the first place. Because not only are we having a conversation about what content is not available for anybody else to see elsewhere, but we're also having a conversation about what content is available full stop. Whether something has been, like, totally lost to time, even though someone still has it, simply because either dealing with the rights or confronting some vindictive rights owner about the weird exorbitant fees that they want for the content are so dire that the only consequence is a classic piece of work has to disappear somewhere.
Yeah, and that's something that's been I think one of the big sticking points for me with streaming, and I mean the issues with rights and availability have certainly always been present, right? The different region encodings and restrictions with physical media, so that's always been there. But I think with streaming we get there's the siloing and the ephemerality. Right. So to your point, Brandon, about what is being preserved, what is showing up at all. Right. And there's a whole question of discoverability with streaming, all the stuff that just vanishes in the tsunami of content. But with regards to the things that are present and then disappear without a moment's notice, I mean, Just to take a very simple example, my wife and I recently completed our third rewatch of the entire 20 plus seasons of Midsummer Murders, and the final episode of the where Tom Barnaby, the initial detective of the series, his farewell episode had a very touching wrap up with his retirement party, essentially. And when we were watching it this most recent time, that entire aspect of that episode was gone. It now just seemed like any other episode, and then suddenly the next episode he was not there anymore. It was his cousin who had taken over, and the whole farewell was absent. And we were starting to think, well, did we imagine this other version? We'd watched it twice, right? And so we found out that there had that version was a slightly more extended one that showed in some regions and had been on Netflix, but now was gone. And we jumped back and forth in between BritBox and I think or Acorn or wherever we were watching it and Netflix, and all the different versions we could find had now disappeared as if it had never existed. Right, so that's just a minor thing with a with a perennially popular series, right? As opposed to the things that are much less high profile.
Mm-hmm.
And so with the streaming services, you're at the mercy of the curation there, that the stuff can appear and disappear, and you have no say about that, as opposed to the disc that is permanently in your collection.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's certainly one of the things that I find very anxiety inducing with the dominance of streaming and the disappearance of physical media. So when, for instance, you hear that there are various high profile series that have been on one streaming service or another that are never going to get a physical media release, which means the only way you can see those is through the subscription to those series. And there you can certainly see the monetary approach. At least you can understand why it's happening, but it still remains frustrating. Not to mention the siloing when you see the rights of virtually the entire 20th Century Fox catalog is now, if you want to see those films with and we're going back now through a century of cinema, are we going to reach the point where they may or may not be on Disney Plus, but they're not going to be anywhere else, right? So the kind of disappearance of cinematic history that we have all ranted about with the first Star Wars, there is the risk of seeing that on a much, much grander scale.
Mm-hmm. There's a point here to be made too, which is that international streaming can also affect this, because different nations may have censorship industries, right, or agencies that can, in fact, make demands on the content placed on a streaming service that exists there. And I won't say any specific countries, but we can imagine some which have censorship agencies that could do precisely this thing and probably have. And so, if you live in that country, you may be getting a version of media that is different from what I get or what Brandon gets or what David gets. I don't know enough about your respective governments to know whether or not you have censorship agencies, but I'm going to assume not, based on what I think I know about both Trinidad and Canada.
I actually have a convoluted example. It's an example that is popular in some anime circles, and everybody knows it to some extent, which is the Kids WB Nelvana dub of Cardcaptors, which is known in Japanese as Cardcaptor Sakura. It was the first time that Cardcaptor Sakura had been dubbed in English. It was very popular, in part because it rebranded itself as being a very action-oriented shonen anime, even though it's based on a shoujo anime, but its protagonist is a teenage girl. But it was very well received, even though as a result of maintaining that Saturday morning cartoon vibe, a lot of the source material from the original anime is removed or recontextualized. One of the very obvious things being one of the male protagonists, Lee Shouron, is in the original Japanese dub of the anime, at least questioning his sexuality, if not entirely bisexual. And on a regular basis has a crush on another male character and will flee the scene comically in order to not let anybody know that he has feelings for this kid. In the American dub, that is all removed. Scrubbed, clean. And I spent a lot of time in my youth when I enjoyed Cardcaptors obviously not knowing that that was a thing. Never saw it. The version of Cardcaptor Sakura that is on Netflix is a dub that they have acquired of the original Japanese. So everything that is in the original Japanese is in there. I didn't know that that happened until an American friend asked me if I remembered having seen it, and I told her no. And then it came up in a conversation with another Caribbean friend who had at that point watched Cardcaptor Sakura in the Caribbean in Spanish, in the Spanish dub. That the Spanish dub is of the original Japanese, and those scenes are there. And the only way that I would have seen it in Trinidad is if I learned Spanish and watched it on Cartoon Network on cable.
And certainly, we've the question of different versions of films or shows appearing in different countries and under different censorship regimes is, I mean, that's always been the case, right? There's nothing new there. But I think what feels to me like more of an issue here is I think along the lines of what you were just saying there, Brendan, that you're at the mercy of the version that's on the streamer, right? Of the streaming service. Is this going to be a complete one or not? It's if it doesn't exist on physical media, where you'd be able to, you're more likely to be able to access different versions of it. Sometimes on the same disc. Here, it's just that one. So if a streaming service is showing Godzilla 1985, right? Well, under that title, it's the American re-edited, redubbed, recut version, where in that version the Russian captain of a submarine deliberately launches a nuclear missile. In the original Japanese cut, he's desperately trying to prevent the launch of said missile. So the plot is quite radically different. Now, if the streaming service decides to show just that version, that's the only one you're going to get. And if there is no other alternative, I don't want to underplay the joys of the streaming services if you can afford to subscribe to enough of them. Just the sheer volume of content that's immediately available at your fingertips, right? I want to watch this movie, bam, there it is, right? That's great. What I find anxiety inducing is when that becomes the only option, right? When the physical media retreats to the point of non-existence, when these are the only things that are open to us to see these things, then we feel more and more mercy at the curation. And even think about the number of times, I mean, you see emails saying, here are all the movies that are now leaving Netflix, watch them now, because it's not this endlessly growing volume of content, right? There's always stuff that is just disappearing. And I think particularly, it seems to me, I mean, we've come to the question of discoverability too, but looking at older films, right? And I mean, when I think of older, I think 30s, 40s, 50s, but you sort of wonder just how much pre-2000 is there. It varies. Sometimes, like I've been amazed at some of the stuff that's popping up on Amazon Prime, right? Is it, oh, look, you've got Dark Shadows in pretty much in its entirety that you can screen in a way that was much, much more difficult than it was before. So that's a definite advantage. But it's the disappearance of options that concerns me, perhaps even more than the question of what's available on a streaming service in one place or another, because at least that option is there when you can't get this streaming service or that streaming service, or the catalog is different from one or the other. There tends to be that option. I'm putting a lot of qualifications here around that, because that there's additional expenses, and then the availability of that, depending on where you live, what region your players can play, comes into effect too. But I don't want to say, too bad I'm not saying let's go back to the golden age of this. Well, no, I don't want to say that at all. But I'm leery of the on the one hand, the apparent proliferation of choice, but then you're asking yourself, well, how many monthly bills can I afford to pay at once? I'd like to watch this movie, but now the only way I can watch this movie whenever I want is to pay $10 a month, as opposed to, now it's mine, I'll just put it on whenever I want.
To that idea of availability, one of the other things that is obvious to me from that Cardcaptor Sakura example is also the idea of how things are made available as well. Because like the operative part of that story that was individually frustrating for me is I could have seen this other version of the thing, but the only reason I couldn't see it in English is because of an assumption that somebody who does not live in the Caribbean made about the main languages that are spoken in the Caribbean.
Ah.
Oh.
That's a thing that still happens to this day. On Netflix, another anime, an anime that I was really eager to rewatch called Bleach, was on Netflix. I don't think it's on Netflix anymore. In like the mid 2010s. I just wanted to sit down and rewatch the thing because I hadn't seen the thing in a while. It had no English subtitles. It has English subtitles if you watch it in the US. But here in Trinidad, the only subtitles that were available were Spanish.
Oh, that's
But that makes no
interesting.
sense.
I don't speak Spanish, but they made the assumption. They made that assumption because portions of Netflix that are in Latin America and the Caribbean, even if they are different from island to island, are making the same assumptions about Latin America and the Caribbean as a region.
Oh.
But this is I'm so confused because it's just a different audio track.
Yeah.
You just give like even if you take the US, right? Like a massive portion of the US population speaks Spanish, and I'm sure would like to have Spanish subtitles for stuff that they watch on Netflix. And if those are available, why wouldn't you just make it both tracks available and just let people choose the option? Like what if I'm practicing my Spanish and I want to watch the Spanish? Do I have to move to Trinidad apparently because I wouldn't be able to get the Spanish subtitles? Like there's no logic.
And the thing is, for other content on Netflix, especially Netflix originals, if an English dub or sub is available for content that is not made primarily in English, you'll get it. And most anime, for instance, don't have the exact same problem, especially when it's an original or something that Netflix went out of their way to specifically license and brand. But every once in a while, you'll find a thing that is not predominantly in English that Netflix will just make an assumption about how I would prefer to get it because they made that assumption for the region. And I'll just never be able to enjoy it because of that assumption. And it's not coming from me. Like that's the thing that is most frustrating of all. Every level of the decision-making process that makes it difficult for me in the Caribbean or for other people in other places in the global south to enjoy media are being made by people who do not live here and do not think about media from our perspective.
And from what you say, Brandon, this is happening, correct me if I'm wrong, primarily with stuff that is a little bit older, right? That is not brand new, that is not, like you say, not high profile or that Netflix is particularly invested in, but something that might be a few years older, that's where you're running into it mostly?
That's usually a large part of the issue as well. That it is, and I mean, this matters to me, especially as somebody who enjoys anime, that I've noticed when it happens to anime, it's typically things that are just about over 10, 15 years old at that point.
So the history of that form is becoming inaccessible.
Yeah, and especially with anime has been increasingly becoming more inaccessible as streaming has attempted to make content more accessible, which is very strange. Like, for instance, Funimation is not available in my region either, but Funimation is presently one of the largest houses of anime that is available for streaming that has been licensed specifically by that group. So if there's something that I wanted to see recently as well, I typically have to commit illegal maritime activities in order to find it. But it also means that it becomes even harder for me to even see what used to be available if it is older than I am. That if there's something that I missed, I can't even find it anymore.
Here's what's wild to me. I want you to imagine for a moment, I am Netflix. I am in charge of selecting the audio tracks, which versions of the dubs we send to Trinidad. And the very first thing that I did was I went, gosh, I don't know where Trinidad is. I do know where Trinidad is, but for now we're pretending.
Right there.
Yeah, like I don't know where it is. So let me Google Trinidad. Oh, look, there's this wiki page. Okay, let's go to the languages. Where does Spanish show up in the languages spoken in Trinidad? It's the last one in the list. Because the first two are both different versions of English, Trinidadian English and Trinidadian English Creole, which are differences, But you could make the assumption here that, well, I imagine they could probably get by with the just whatever English sub we have. We could just do that one.
Yeah.
You could assume that. But what you shouldn't assume is like, gosh, maybe I should just skip right over Hindustani, Antillean, French, Creole, Chinese, Arabic, and then go straight to Spanish as the last one. What they did is they looked at a map and they went, well, Trinidad must be just like Bolivia or French Guiana, which like also, hello, do you know what language they speak in French Guiana? But yeah, like they just, there's a laziness on there that I just don't understand. I mean, I guess I do understand it because it's probably like a bunch of Americans making decisions and they probably failed US history and world history.
But I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. It is. A very spiteful part of me would love very much to just like have brief control over a streaming service in the United States and decide everybody, if you want to watch the latest thing that comes out of this series, you just need to learn Dutch or something out of the blue. Because that's essentially what they're doing for us. And I'm sure that it happens in a lot of other spaces as well. And I'm sure even more paradoxically is that like the further out into the global south you get, that is, the more south and the more east you go, they're probably not even catering for the language that you speak.
Yeah, Vietnamese would be a good example. So trying to find a Vietnamese dub or sub of Star Wars is basically out, and my girlfriend is Vietnamese, so her first language is Vietnamese, and while she understands English very well and she can speak English very well, it's not her strongest language. She would much rather have like a Vietnamese subtitle for Star Wars, and I want to be able to give her that experience so that she can see something in her language, so that there isn't anything that she's missing, right? Or that she feels like she missed something because the words are going so fast, but that doesn't exist as far as I can tell. I don't know if there are any Vietnamese dubs on any media that I can find. There might be some like illegal dubs or subs that people have done, but accessibility in terms of language is like really strange, because if the subs exist clearly in the case that you presented, Brandon, they're not being made available. Right. In your case, English is the dominant language. So why wouldn't English dubs or subs be one of the options when you can do both? And in other cases, we're talking like some areas, like in parts of the global south, where they may not be able to access them in a language that is their preferred language at all in any capacity, because they may not be released at all. I know when I was on the Vietnamese Netflix, not all the stuff that I downloaded had Vietnamese subtitles or dubs at all. They were in English, which begs the question: who is your audience, Netflix? Because while a lot of people in Vietnam do speak English, most of them don't. They're not fluent English speakers like us three, because they're not using that. That's not a thing they need on a regular basis. They're running around speaking a Vietnamese dialect of some kind. So who is? If you want, I just don't understand. I mean, I do and I don't. It's just very confusing. So
I think very accidentally what has kind of come about in the age of streaming is that everybody wants to make global audience money, but nobody actually has a global audience sensibility because they've never actually had to stop to think about an audience member who is not exactly like themselves. And because they control the media because of hegemony in the shadow of colonialism and empire, then if I have to actually stop to think that maybe there is someone who will enjoy their favorite piece of media, someone who wants to enjoy their favorite piece of media, who doesn't look like or sound like them.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to bring us to a happy.
Is there a happy?
This is going back to kind of a point David was making, because I think we're getting close to the end here, but I do want to bring up a happy, which is that in the early days of Netflix, if we were making the podcast back then, we would have run into infinitely larger problems than we do now for doing any kind of media product, just because we'd have to rely on a lot more physical media. So in a positive way, streaming services have made it a lot easier for us to coordinate an international crew of people living on, in North America, in the Caribbean islands. In some cases, we've got people who have come on the show who are from, places like Singapore, Australia, etc. Streaming services have made it easier for us to have those folks on the show. The fact matters that with those services, more stuff is accessible to this crew. And that's awesome. The downsides we've been talking about is just that it's obviously not it's not universally accessible all across the board. There's still an issue of access.
Mhm.
But I do think we can take some joy in the fact that while imperfect, we're moving in the right direction of accessibility.
I'll give you that solace. I'll give you the Kanye West. I'm gonna let you finish. My obvious issue is because you did acknowledge just now that it's an accessibility issue.
Yes, 100%.
It might seem very like selfish from the perspective of three mostly able-bodied persons in this panel specifically to classify it as such, but I do believe that it is as such. And through that same analogy, doing some of the work to make media accessible to the rest of the world, but not all of it, or not asking more concerned questions about that availability, is kind of like building a ramp that only goes a quarter of the way into the building and then telling the people who can no longer get into the building, well, at least you can get outside the building.
And this may just have been the luck of the draw for me, but without wanting to be the rain on your parade there, Sean, well, perhaps wanting to be that, is that
Yes, please do it.
So at least in speaking anecdotally, every time that I think I've been on one of the podcasts where we've been looking at something that you've mentioned or whoever has been setting up that episode has said it's available on Netflix, not once has that been the case for me. I've had to get at it through some other way. And then, and of course, and this has never been because the whatever it is we're looking at in question has been something extremely high profile, right? It's been something a little bit off the wall in some way, which I think is coming back to a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about, and in terms of that accessibility, as if the accessibility is there only for certain doors to the building, the most popular ones. But if you want to get at this other stuff, no. There are no ramps and the doors are locked.
Yeah.
I don't think that rains on my parade, because I think I was just trying to give us one little bit of a glimmer of happiness.
But I had to take it away because that's me.
No, you can't take all of the glimmer. Like, it is the case that it is easier now for us three, of the three of us, to be able to watch, and I agree with you, David, it would be, in general, the more popular stuff. It would be easier for us to find on some sort of streaming platform a popular media item, right? The new, like Black Widow, right? It would be easier for us to each be able to watch the new Black Widow movie that's coming up, right? Maybe not perfectly, but it would be a lot more likely than if this were 2000 before a streaming service, when the only way you would be able to see it would be if it were in the theaters, which, given we're still in pandemic time, I don't know what that would have, there's a whole bunch of speculation about exactly how that would have mattered. But that still leaves huge gaps and problems with how all of this is made accessible. And I don't want to downplay those things, but to also say that there is a thing of access that has improved.
Yeah. But I guess my point is there's a certain insidiousness here where what's easily accessible to all of us is the high profile blockbuster, essentially. But the things that are not that are harder to get at or vanishing, literally. So to come back to the anime examples that Brandon was giving, as if there's you're seeing the pre-2010 or before just sort of disappearing to the point where will you even know that it's there to go looking for it, or is that a part of history just evaporating?
Yeah. This is where I very rapidly pivot into another one of my own personal gripes, which is to come back to that DVD reference that was made earlier. When I was very young, my uncle used to collect old kung fu flicks, like the very classic Shaw Brothers kung fu movies, and most of my teenage years with that person was spent watching those movies, literally on a loop. And a lot of those classic films you can't even find online anymore, but the ones that you can aren't available here either.
Legally, of course.
Legally. If the culture of bootleg DVDs were still a thing, I'd still have whole bags full of those. But if I just wanted to sit down in front of my computer and watch the thing, I can't.
Yeah, there's so much older cinema now that is especially something that's not. And here you were talking about, I think the examples you just gave there, Brandon, or older European horror films and the like, that we're essentially now dependent upon the kind of boutique physical media companies like Arrow and Severin, Mondo Macabro, and the like, to them putting these things out, because they're the only ones doing that, and these things are not just showing up on streaming at all, right? In some instances, I see that certainly Shudder is becoming better and better at the curation of bringing in more and more history into its service. So it does seem to be improving by leaps and bounds. But again, the accessibility of it, the fact that Brandon can't get it at all, so that a lot of these films only exist in these forms, or you're dependent on these companies to get hold of them and release them. But again, they're just not there on streaming at all. Or are we going to look at things like something again that a series that comes out that's made for streaming service A that never gets a release except on streaming service A? Sorry, I missed that. What did you say? And sorry. let me start that up again. Shut up! I turned you down. I turned you off even. Listening all the time. Overlord.
That's staying in the podcast. It's staying.
Yeah. Apple TV, if you don't decide to solve this problem for us, we'll still be mad at you.
So let's say, just to take an obvious example, let's say there's something that comes out. I say obvious because this is a streaming service I don't have access to. Let's say there's some really amazing series that is made for Hulu, and they decided we'll never have a physical media release, as is happening with like the Marvel series, for example, on Disney Plus. And all right, well, so this becomes a thing that is not just I can't see it unless I subscribe, but I cannot subscribe because Hulu is not available in Canada. And that just like Brandon can't get any Shudder exclusives because he can't get Shudder. Now, if they get released in some other form, then great. But if we're moving towards a place where there's more and more of the siloing, then there will be all kinds of stuff that people will never be able to get hold of depending on where they are.
Yeah, and this has exacerbated, I think, now because of the way streaming has kind of consolidated or is consolidating into very specific media property hands. Like there's Netflix, which has been like feeding off of everybody else and then is now making lots of its own stuff. But you have Disney Plus, which is it's our catalog of stuff that we have total control over. So anything we make is specific to our entity. And now all of the streaming services are moving in that direction where they're putting a lot of their effort into making original content that they have full control over. I do know that we've got some international listeners, and so I would really love to hear from some of you. We've covered, a number of different angles, but there's probably other things that we haven't considered. This is literally a 45, 50-minute podcast by the end. So if you are outside the United States, or you are a person from the United States who lives outside the United States, which also qualifies, and you have any thoughts or opinions or views on trying to stream in those locations, we'd love to hear from you. So please go to skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions and let us know, your thoughts on this subject. If we missed an angle, tell us, and we'll put together a mailbag and we'll try to talk about it. Any case, as always, if you want to follow us, you can follow us at Skiffy and Fanny on Twitter and Instagram. And please do subscribe to the newsletter at skiffyandfanty.com/newsletter. We're still working on those reviews. We're trying to get to those 50 reviews on iTunes. So if you'd like to, please review the show on iTunes, 5 stars, please. And as always, support us at patreon.com/skiffyandfanty. We need all your money so we can take over the world and we can change IP law so that it benefits all people instead of just Disney. So there's that. More information coming on Patreon changes when we make them. So on that note, you can find me at Sean Duke on Twitter, seanduke.net, or patreon.com/thejoyfactory.
And you can find me at The Rising Tides on Twitter, brandonobrien.space, and GMing The Case of the Cindered Seal at speculateSF.com.
And you can find me on Twitter at David_Annandale, or at my very humble blog at davidannandale.com.
Yeah, and buy all of David's books, as we keep saying. And also, I would just note that Brandon has a poetry collection coming out, and we'll probably talk about that at some point.
Oh yes, it's coming out very soon. I would love very much to talk about it.
We will talk about it. Alrighty, folks. So on that note, I will be starting, as folks may or may not have heard in the episode, depending on how I edited this. I'm starting Monsanto Plus, a new streaming service. I really hope that you will join us. Basically, every episode is just a mega corporation suing a farmer out of existence. So
Cool.
high quality drama.
So what you're saying is you'll never run out of content ever.
Basically, yeah. I'm literally not doing this.
Oh god,
I can't. I like farmers too much. So, anyway, awkward ending and scene.
Bye everybody.
If you want to support this show, you can go to patreon.com/skiffyandfanty or skiffyandfanty.com, our website, where you can get access to all of our fancy things. Our music comes from Holy Mole. You can support him and his work at patreon.com/holymole. Thank you for listening.